How does your sin compare to the sins of others? Are you in the habit of making such comparisons? Probably, if we're honest with ourselves, we all do this. So with that, welcome to another Fast Friday. Today, we're going to be talking about our response to sin. On Sunday, Chris beautifully broke down David's own understanding of his sin and redemption from Psalm 51. Chris showed us the process that David went through as one who had an open and repentant heart. That process began with awareness or an acknowledgement of his sin and moved into humility, an acknowledgement of God's goodness, then into reflection, and finally into a request for forgiveness. When it comes to acknowledging our own sin, without even realizing it, a lot of us are making comparisons between our lives and the lives of others. There's two general ways that we make comparisons of sin. The first is a way of creating a rationale for our own sin, our own rebellion or wanderings. And we say things like, well, I do this, but I don't do that. So at least I'm not as bad as that guy. And I must be okay. And so in doing this, we create reasons that permission for ourselves to continue sinning, even though we know we're breaking God's heart in the process. A second way that we compare our sin to the sin of others is by looking at ourselves and saying, my sin is so bad and I am so dirty and guilty that God could not possibly want me. And God's people wouldn't want me either if they knew what I had done. And in this, we begin a painful process of shame and hiding. Many of us believe that because God is so holy and averse to sin, that he cannot be with us in our sinfulness. And yet the complete opposite is actually true. Romans 5:8 says that God demonstrated his love for us in this, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And in verse 10, we read that while we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to him through the death of his son. So the fact is that God came closer to us than he had ever been before through the person of Jesus Christ while we were at our worst, while we were sinners, while we were considered God's enemies. And Christ's death and our acceptance of his forgiveness created something remarkable. We went from being called sinners to being called saints. And yet, we still sinned. But it was in this very condition, being saints who sin, that God came even closer to us through the presence of his indwelling Spirit. Think about that. God could not be any closer to us. He has taken up residence inside us, even though we continue to sin. God can be with us, even in our sinfulness. But many of us live with the misunderstanding that we have to get all cleaned up before we can come to God, or before we can have a meaningful relationship with him, or before we can be used by him. This is simply not scriptural, and yet it keeps many a Christ follower from being in a close relationship with God. We keep God at arm's length because we do not feel forgiven and we do not feel worthy of his acceptance. So as a result, many live outside of the fullness and abundance of God's goodness and mercy because they believe that their actions disqualify them from God's love. And this is where a proper understanding of scriptural truth is so vital. If I believe that it is my actions that cause God to either love me or reject me, I am missing the mark. because there is nothing I can do to cause God to love me anymore. And there is nothing I can do to make God love me any less. God loves me based on his character and not my actions. Righteous living comes first by our acceptance of God's deep, abiding love for us, and then out of a profound desire to love him back. Our good works do not save us. The work of Jesus Christ on the cross is the thing that saves us. Our good works are an expression of our love and gratefulness. So when David says, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me," he is fully aware of his sinfulness and has stopped trying to hide from God. He has spoken the truth of his sin, and he believes that God has forgiven him. This is crucial. David believed God. If we never let ourselves off the hook for our sin, we are essentially telling Jesus that his work on the cross was not enough. This is simply not so. Psalm 103:12 says, "As far as the east is from the west, so far has God removed our sin or transgressions from us." Once we confess our sin, God chooses never to think of those sins again. He chooses to put them away, and he does not hold us accountable for them any longer. This is why we can come out of hiding, and this is why we can desire to live with a clean heart in a way that honors God for the sacrifice he made for us. So today, I really encourage you to print out the prayer project that was emailed to you along with this video. It's asking some questions that are really worth reflecting upon. Have you been hiding from God or God's people because of shame? Have you been dishonoring God with sinful behavior? And do you need to ask for forgiveness? Do you need to turn a corner and begin living with a clean heart and a right spirit? Psalm 51 begins with the absolute best news ever. David is asking God to have mercy on him, but listen to why he believes that God will have mercy on him. He says, "Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love. According to your abundant mercy, blot out my transgressions." We can stop comparing ourselves to one another and simply live a God-honoring life because we know and believe that we are forgiven and free, and that forgiveness and freedom comes by way of God's abundant love and mercy. So today, I pray that you will be well, and may your time with God leave you feeling truly loved and accepted and forgiven. See you later. Bye-bye.